there are approximately 3 million tons of chocolate consumed per year, which is, objectively a lot of chocolate. I was going to say a ton, but it doesn't really do it justice. What is 3 million tons, does it? What most people don't know is that a lot of the cocoa needed for the chocolate is farmed by children working in slave-like conditions, which it is disgusting when you think about it, and even more disgusting when you see it on camera, like you've managed to capture. So, first of all, thank you for coming on the show here.
Thank
Uh,
you for inviting me.
how did you get wind of this issue to begin with? Were you just like a chocolate fan, and then you went, "Holy crap, it's being made by slaves"? How did this come to you?
No, actually, I was just a consumer. I was at my local supermarket to buy a chocolate bar, and I was just, that's more than 15 years ago, and there were 7 chocolate bars, and one was with a fair trade mark, and I was just like, okay, one is fair trade. What about the 6 others? Are they
Yeah,
unfair trade? That was
yeah.
actually my question to myself. So that was the very beginning of it, and then I went back and started to look up if there were any stories to research, and I didn't find much, but there were a few pieces. One was in an American magazine called Fortune, where there were reports about child slavery and trafficking of kids. And I decided to reach out to the photographer from that piece, and I asked him, "Is this really a big issue out
Mhm.
there?" He said, "Yeah, yeah, you can go with me." And I invited him to Copenhagen. He slept on my sofa for a couple of days, and then we traveled to Ivory Coast. And honestly, it was just outside the door. It was huge. I was so shocked about how many kids were working in the cocoa fields.
So most cocoa comes from Ivory Coast, right? There's one. Is it one big Swiss supplier? The name sounds like Barry Gullibo, but I'm getting it wrong.
Yeah, yeah, no. There is like most of the cocoa comes from Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast.
Mhm.
That's 40% and 25% from Ghana. They are neighboring countries. So that's the cocoa belt, and most of the cocoa is bought by Barry Callebaut or Olam. They are like and Cargill, American Cargill, and they buy like almost all the cocoa, and then they are selling it to all the chocolate makers around the world.
Okay, so chocolate makers being like Ferrero Rocher, Nestle, the brands that we see in the
Mars,
stores. Mars, yeah, Mars, yeah.
yes.
Okay. What made you want to go undercover in, was it Mali in Africa, to investigate child trafficking? Because that just, trying to write about something, expose something, do a podcast about something, that I get, but you were just like, no, I want to go and see this with my own eyes. That had to be kind of a trip, no
Yeah,
pun intended.
yeah. I think I didn't think too much about it then. I was
That's the
just
key,
so
right?
focused. Yeah, because if you think too much, you probably don't do stupid things and
Yeah.
go undercover in Mali with lots of jihadists and lots of trouble. It's a very, very poor country, and but I decided to go undercover because sneaking around like a white guy in remote areas in Mali is not like too easy, and with
Yeah.
an open camera. So but on the other hand, it was just a daily thing that kids from Mali were transported from Mali into Ivory Coast and then into the cocoa plantations. So, I was just sitting at a bus stop in the southern part of the country, and some local helpers told me, "Hey, you just wait for the next bus, and you will see that kids, 6, 8, 10 years old, are getting picked up by traffickers, and they literally just did that in front of my face, and I
Wow.
remember this." So it was so like heartbreaking because you're out on a mission, You want to have your documentation of the problems. On the other hand, I just wanted to stop it in a way,
Mhm.
to just go run to the local police and say, hey guys, there is illegal activities, but it's not an option when you're out working undercover in countries like Mali.
Of course. I mean, if there are kids, first of all, 6, 8, and 10, up to age, I think 14 was one of the kids in the documentary, or 15 years old, something like that. I mean, I have a 3-year-old kid, and I had to build a Lego set with him last night, and it's tough for him to do that. He's 3. I can't really imagine what a 6-year-old could do on a plantation. And also, I assume you're not really getting your money's worth out of a 6-year-old kid, so they work there for years, I would imagine, until you do. And it's just the heart it's so unbelievably cruel to think of a 6-year-old kid who should be watching cartoons and eating cereal in his pajamas, getting up early after sleeping outside in a hut that's locked, and cutting cocoa pods open for I don't know, 8 to 12 hours a day in the sun, and being smuggled in there away from his mom and dad, away from his brothers and sisters, from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. It's really heartbreaking, and that's understating this, of course. But yeah, you can't report it to the cops because they already know. They know, of course they know.
Yeah, it's so easy information to get. And that was what I was also a bit shocking for me, that let's just say it was hiding the problems. No, it's easy. And the companies, the executives, they know. Cargill has been present in Cote d'Ivoire for more than 40 years. They have like thousands of employees in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ivory Coast. It takes you a couple of hours driving into the cocoa belt in your four-wheel driver, and then you will walk into random. They even know where the cocoa comes from the specific areas and plantations, because they have to know the producers of the cocoa. So it's so easy. It's just under your nose. So claiming at that time when I did my first film, they said, "Oh my goodness, we didn't know there was a problem." Well, today they are more like, well, we know there is a problem and we are doing our best to stop this, which is bollocks in my opinions. Because if you wanted to stop this, it would be so easy. Look at them right now. People can't pay their bills for energy. In Europe, it's a big disaster at the moment. And you know what? Governments around Europe, they are now forcing people to say, hey, we need to be in houses. We need to pull down the heat, because we are lacking electricity and energy. And guess what? They have a solution to it. It's all about being able to make decision, to make changes. They can make the changes. And that's what's really, sorry for my French, pisses me off.
Yeah.
That we are talking about America's biggest company, family owned consumer company, supermarket, Cargill. They could change this and they would be front runners if they did that. But unfortunately, they don't really care. I have to say, this is, of course, my opinion. They don't care, because if they did care, they would make the changes. They can do it hand in hand with Mars, with Nestle, with all the big companies. That would be so easy to do.
Yeah, it really is horrifying, and I think what you're doing is important because I'm sure their logic goes a little something like this. We can't stop child slavery because it will raise that means we would have to pay workers more, and if we pay workers more, or we pay even the child laborers actual money to deal with this problem where we enforce this, it's going to raise the price of chocolate. And if Cargill raises the price of chocolate, then Mars or Nestle, and they don't do that, we're going to lose to our competitors. So what you're doing is surfacing this such that the publicity is so bad for everyone involved that they all have to do it at the same time, which means at the end consumer pays 5 cents or 4 cents more for a bar of chocolate, and no kids die on slave. No kids are trafficked from poor countries to other countries to work in fields all day as slaves. And that's a pretty. I mean, that's the definition of fair trade,
It
really, in
is.
many ways.
And the moment the thing is, when you look at the production of a chocolate bar, only 6 to 7% of the money goes to the farmers. So there is. Let's just put it this way: there is space to make it a better deal for the farmers. Why is it the one who does all the hard work will get the lowest pay? Of course, I know, because they don't have a union. They don't
Or have
have
power.
the
Yeah.
power to make this. And unfortunately, too many hands have to get money before it goes to the consumers. But as you said, the consumers could also, do something to change things by, for instance, not buying that kind of chocolate.
Yeah, we'll talk about that towards the end of the show because I do have some questions about what we can do. The other thing is, and I know that there's people who go, yeah, well, it's market power, economic. Nobody needs chocolate. It's a luxury product, right? I can't not get to work because my car doesn't have chocolate in it. I'm not going to freeze over the cold winter because I don't have chocolate, right? It's a luxury good. So you can't really apply the same sort of rationalizations and justifications as you would to natural gas, gasoline, petroleum, whatever. And we've done, like you mentioned, we figured out how to deal with the fact that we don't have the petroleum issue, and yet we're willing to go, kids, slaves, farming cocoa pods. Look, we got bigger fish to fry, and that's the sad truth about this. And it really is like an epidemic of vanishing children. You spotlight this single village that you walked into, and I think this was there was something like 500 inhabitants in this village. It's very small.
430.
Yeah. Yeah, not even 500. And it's missing 130 plus children. So over 20% of the population of this village is missing, or a
Disappeared.
quarter of the population is missing. And they don't know where the kids are. They were saying the traffickers come to these village markets and they lure the kids away without even telling the parents, which, as a parent of a small kid, I cannot even imagine the trauma, the nightmare that this induces. You take the kids to the market to go get some frickin' tomatoes and they just never come home, and then maybe they escape 5 years later after being enslaved. I mean, it's just a terrible, horrific situation.
It is, and what I really don't understand is why we, in such a rich world we are living in, 2022 now, and this is still a problem. Modern slavery with kids. That's really what pisses me off. That we are talking about our future, our children. One thing is that you have modern slavery with adults around the world, but with children, how dare we to to not acting right away to stop this right? Why is it that big countries like US and all the countries in the EU and Europe does not stop this immediately? Because we don't care.
We
We
don't
don't
care.
care. That's the only conclusion I can reach to is we don't care. Why is it that we don't care about children? They don't have a voice. They don't have any power. They don't have anything, and they are going to be the future of this world. I find that horrible. It's horrible, terrible.
I completely agree. I was horrified to find out how many kids were working on these cocoa plantations. It's something, and there are different estimates out there. You'll look at one that says 1.5 million, which in Ivory Coast and Ghana mostly, and other organizations will say 30,000. But even if you take that ridiculously low estimate, that is a ton of child slaves, no matter how you look at it. The population of the city I grew up in was like 40,000, right? So the idea that three-fourths of that could have been enslaved children, that's hard. That's hard to swallow. Um, I think you wrote this in one of the pieces, or this was written about you. The world's chocolate companies depend on cocoa produced with the aid of more than 1 million West African child laborers, according to a new report sponsored by the Labor Department.
That's
Nearly 1.
right.
Nearly 1.6 million children were engaged in child labor in cocoa production, according to the survey, and most of those were involved in tasks considered hazardous, such as wielding machetes, carrying heavy loads, or working with pesticides. Because of changes in methodology, the number of child laborers in the new survey, blah, 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 the reason the numbers don't match, basically. And this isn't about you. Sorry, it was an article written that also had your mention of you in it and your work in it. So it's just it, crazy numbers. And the U.S. Department of Labor in 2015 said it's probably more like 2 million children. And these are not organizations known for hyperbolic misinformation, right? It's the Department of Labor.
Exactly.
They're just crunching the numbers here.
Exactly, and that's what I don't understand. Well, even the companies right now are agreeing to that kind of numbers. It's not like something they disagree in. We know there is a problem, and that's why I said from I started my first research back in 2008 and up to now. Now they admit, well, we have a problem, and now they're just saying, now it's 2025, everything would be, good again. Everything would be sustainable, produced, and there would be no kids out there. That's a new fat big lie.
Yeah.
Because why is it, first of all, why is it that they have to have more time? They've been working on this officially from 2001, where they said we will get rid of all child labor in the so-called Harkin-Engel protocol made by two representative, one of from the House and one of the Senate, and nothing has happened since. They've just pushed and pushed the date of when this will not be a problem anymore. And I have no faith in that any politician really can make any changes, because they have had so many options to get rid of this problem. And I'm genuinely I'm asking myself, why is it? Why isn't a company like Cargill or Mars saying, well, we could do a PR stunt, well, a PR marketing out of this. Now we want to be the first mover. We are living in a world right now where the planet is under pressure. The
Yeah.
climate changes is doing a good job trying to get rid of all of us. We have lots of problems with animal welfare and stuff. I'm just thinking, why is it that some of them in the boardroom saying, guys, I think I have a brilliant idea. Let's just invite this guy, Miki from Denmark, and ask him, can we do this together with you and a few others, and tell us how we can do it, and we will pay what it costs. They would be a big business for them. And I do not understand why they don't do that. Because right now it's the time for big changes, and the consumers will follow this suggestion. I'm 100%. But I know what is the problem. You mentioned it in the beginning. The problem is that no one dare to take the lead alone.
Right.
They have to agree in a big group of all the big companies that this is what we do, instead of being front runners and make the changes this world are so in need of. I genuinely don't understand, but
Yeah, it's I mean Europe tends to lead the way on this. We do that kind of thing with laws and regulation. And I'm not a huge fan of over regulating things, but this is one of those areas where laws and regulation come in and make everybody change at the same time, and that's the only way we rip off this band-aid. Going back to something you'd said earlier with Hark and Engel, so people know what that is with the senator and the House of Representatives. They were trying back in, was it 2001 or so, trying to get just a label on chocolate that said, "Hey, this bar may be made with child labor." It was something along those lines. Or this bar was not made with child labor, and they had to audit the thing. So they set the deadline. Of course, industry fought that like crazy. They missed the 2005 deadline. They missed the 2010 deadline. Then the industry said, well, let's just revise our goal and make it less ambitious. Let's just get a 70% reduction in child labor instead of eliminating it. And then we'll do that by 2020. And then that goal, too, surprise, surprise, didn't get met. And there's also still no plan to label chocolate that's made with slave labor. So basically, they delayed, didn't do anything, then reduced the goal, then didn't even accomplish that. And now they're just basically ignoring it.
yeah, And I think since they started this, they had a joint agreement of having a kind of program which covers all the companies. But right now they have taken all the programs back. So Nestle has their own, Mondelez has, for instance, Cocoa Life. So they have their own programs to try to fight against child labor, but nothing really works. I was in Ghana that was in January this year. That's Mondelez. Mondelez owns Cadbury, which is a former big British brand, a chocolate brand. Mondelez is American, based in Chicago. It's a huge chocolate manufacturer. And you know what? I went to the Cocoa Life plantations, the so-called sustainable sourced cocoa plantations. It was full of Ghanaian children working, even forced one. We met a she was 12, and she was so afraid. She was against her will at that plantation, but she didn't dare to say anything to the plantation owner.
Of course. And she's a 12-year-old girl who's
yeah.
alone. Why would she say anything? Why would she? Yeah. It's
Her wish was to go to school.
Yeah, that's another important note. These kids are not in school. It's not like they go to school and they work an hour in the cocoa plantation. They sleep outside in these huts in the fields. Then in the morning, somebody who's essentially their jailer will unlock the door and let them out for, I don't know, 6, 8 hours of work, whatever the workday is.
From
12.
More 12 hours. Yes, from
And then they
6
go back in
morning
the
to
hut.
6 in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, in the African sun during the harvest season. It's horrible. I mean, there's no getting around it. There's just no getting around it. Backing up a little bit, or jumping around a little bit, I should say, this has to be dangerous work investigating this. Surely you are at risk exposing something like this. I don't just mean of a risk of lawsuits for defamation or whatever. I'm sure that's a risk too. But tell me about Julian Rakifa. I mean, this guy just vanished.
Yeah, just a few years before I went the first time, Guy André Kiefer, who is a Canadian journalist, he was investigating in Ivory Coast, and he just disappeared, and they never didn't find his body or anything. He's still missing today. So I knew that when I was digging into it. And of course, it is dangerous to dig into such a big business, because no one really likes you to try to get to the bottom of this problem, because we are talking about so many billions of US dollars who's changing hands. So of course I was aware of that, but again, I think if I did think too much, I wouldn't go. And I know my children have said a couple of times, isn't it the time where you let someone else to do your work? And I do understand, and of course it is something I am thinking about.
Your kids are grown.
Yes, they are,
Yeah.
but but
They still love you.
they still love me.
Yeah.
Apparently, yeah. No, I think it's a thing where you really need to not think too much. You need to look at the mission, what you're trying to achieve, and stick to that, no matter what. I've been in a kind of a hold up in Mali with some local militias.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I got I was afraid, because my local fixer, he looked at me and said, just pay them the money. And I could see in his eyes that this was serious business. And we were in the middle of the night in the bush, which was stupid, but we couldn't manage to go from one village to another village in time. So I just had to take everything I had of cash, and I gave it. And fortunately, they said, okay, hey, go, but they were pointing like AK-47 into the cars, and they didn't look like friendly. Let me put it that way.
Yeah,
And but and the thing is, you never know in those situations if it's going to get like really
ugly.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could, you know, potentially they could have shot us. No one would have known where we were or anything. Um, that's one thing. And then I've been arrested in Ivory Coast with my American photographer. He passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but he managed to get us out through the American embassy in Abidjan after
That's the capital of the. Is Abidjan the capital of Ivory Coast?
well,
Okay.
it's not the capital. It's the financial capital, if you like.
So it's the New
Yamoussoukro.
York to it's not the
Yes,
Washington D.C. It's the New York. Okay,
it
gotcha.
is. Yes.
So yeah, it has to be in the back of your mind when you're out in the middle of nowhere, toting around a freaking video camera, a bunch of batteries, audio gear. You're exposing what amounts to international corporate sponsored organized crime that goes to the absolute highest levels of government. You're doing it on camera. Yeah, like if they catch you out there, you are totally screwed. You could easily vanish without a trace. Nobody would ever find you, let alone even start looking for you. Where would they even begin to do that? And as you'd mentioned, these trafficking areas, many are controlled by militias. So I assume
Yes.
for those listening, that means no government control, no police presence. There's no one to go and tell. They couldn't even, if they wanted to find what's left of you, they couldn't even necessarily get into this area easily to do it because it's controlled by rebels.
Yes, basically
Ugh.
yes, and that makes it, of course, and just adding up that information is just where you think, is this really worth doing it? But I really and genuinely think it's worth doing it, and I'm not planning to stop anyway before the end of child slavery. So that's my plan. But of course, I am cautious about not flacking when I'm traveling. Unfortunately,
Flacking? What does that mean?
you know, saying, raising a flag, saying,
Oh, flagging. Flagging. Yeah.
I'm coming now. No, I think the good thing is, president goes and come in those countries. So it's a little bit easier when there has been an election and a new president is elected, because then a kind of out of control who is the enemy of the state, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So are the militias in on the trafficking, or is it just that since these areas are outside government control, nobody can do anything to solve the problems that are already there?
When there is money, there is
Yeah,
militias.
that's what I
So
thought.
up in the northern part of Ivory Coast, there are cooperations between local militias and, yeah, the plantation owners. But look at it this way: you could say it's organized crime. It is, but it's in small circle, because at the end of the day, I have a kind of an understanding of why plantation owners. We're talking about family owned small farms who can't afford any labor, because what they get for the cocoa beans are so low that they can't afford to hire anyone. So that's the reason why they have to buy, for instance, a child to help them out, despite them not
Right.
paying for the kids. Um, so
They
in a
pay the
kind of
trafficker for the kids. They don't pay the
yes,
kid labor.
no,
They give the money to a trafficker who sits
yes,
around smoking and kidnapping kids or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, and it's at the end of the day, it's all about poverty. If you look at it in your own country, the United States of America, you have lots of crime too, but at the end of the day, it all goes down at that level. It goes down to poverty, because really poor people want to have, want to survive in a way. I'm not talking about high-end criminals who are like organizing everything from a big mansion up in the hills or whatever. No, I'm talking about like underground people who do crime. I'm not accepting crime at any point, but I do understand sometimes that very poor people are part of a crime system only because they want to survive. We're not talking about they are, the traffickers, they are poor people. They're just locals who, uh, by coincidence, did find a way to get a little bit of money.
Hmm.
And so they trick the kids from Mali into Ivory Coast. So it's a kind of a system which is based on needs, but at the end of the day, it comes down to we as consumers doesn't pay enough for the chocolate. And you could also say the big to blame is the companies because the profit they get from this is so gigantic. It's stock market, unless it's Cargill, which is family owned, but rest of the companies are on the stock market and they are in it for one thing, profit, which is all right. But profit comes first to anything. And that's where I question a bit, why is it that it's necessary to have such a big profit and what you get out of it is child slavery? And as I said so many times, and I repeat saying this, I don't understand that. It's terrible.
I want to back up a little bit. Can you briefly describe the cocoa plantation to chocolate that we're eating process? It starts off on a farm, okay.
Yeah.
Then what happens? What happens on the
most of
farm?
the
Where does it go?
most of the cocoa farms are small family owned, like
Okay. Hmm.
a family with maybe 2, 3, 4 kids,
Hmm.
and it's between 4 and 6 acre, so it's
Acres,
tiny.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
acres. Yeah, it's tiny. So what they do, they have the cocoa trees is in kind of the jungle, together with a few other trees like rubber trees, and the cocoa beans. It takes a quite long time before it gets to a pot. It's a pot where the beans are inside.
Right, the
Uh,
pods, yeah.
yeah, and the pots is like the size of a football, basically American football.
American
The-
football. Oh, wow,
yeah,
that's pretty big, actually.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
contains around 26 to 30 beans. So they need to harvest the beans and then they have to crack the beans, open it, and take out the beans for drying. And they're using machetes to cut down the parts and to break the parts to get the beans out. They need to use a machete. And we're talking about kids doing that, and they are taking out the beans, and then the beans are dried in the sun for a couple of days, and then a middleman comes to the farms and asks to pay to buy the beans, and he collects like beans from maybe 500 plantations in the same area, and then he goes to companies like Cargill or Barry Callebaut or Olam and sell the beans to them. And then they have all the beans and then they are selling it either to directly to companies like Nestle or Mars, or they are selling it on the stock market as a commodity.
Commodity, yeah.
Yes. So that's basically how it works. But of course, there is lots of hands to feed in this chain. It's it's not a complicated supply chain. It's quite easy to understand. But every time you do business, some people always find a way to take a little bit, a little piece of the business, and that's what's happening.
Now, I know this kind of stuff can be difficult to hear. Believe me, I understand. But we have a lot of podcasts on all kinds of topics, like this one if you're into serious stuff. But we have shows on lighter topics too. Emmy nominated comedians, billionaire investors, Fortune 500 CEOs, and of course, organized crime figures, legendary Hollywood directors, Russian spies, arms traffickers, undercover agents, rocket scientists, neuroscientists, and more. So check out The Jordan Harbinger Show anywhere you find your podcasts. Now, back to the show. €1 for the farmer for a kilo of cocoa becomes 40 chocolate bars, which are, of course, worth well over €1. Probably a euro each. I don't even know, right? So they're really turning quite a bit of profit. Yes, there's a lot of middlemen, of course, but there's a lot of margin here as well for what looks like backbreaking work. You mentioned getting the pods, cracking them open, getting the beans out, drying them in the sun, and these farmers make what I think I read some research. This is up to €1,000 a year to feed a
Yes.
wife and three kids, a whole family. So it's just wild how poor they must be. And this is in Ghana. In Ivory Coast, they actually make 30% less because apparently Ghana has a minimum national price on cocoa that they
They have the
enforce.
same in Ivory Coast now,
But they do,
but
okay.
this minimum price is, again, it's bollocks, because remember, it's the state, the government makes that minimum price. But if that price is so low that it does make sense, you can have like minimum wage in the US, for instance. It's so low, so it doesn't really make sense. So despite that there is a minimum price, it doesn't work for the farmers
Right,
because
it
it's
doesn't
too
necessarily get to
low.
the farmer. That makes sense, right? The minimum price may not even get to the farmer. It might just be it's the person who sells the beans, maybe the guy who's the middleman or the
Yeah,
intermediary is getting that price. They're not necessarily saying, "Hey, I'm making more now, so I'm going to kick it back down to you guys." They're just saying, "How do you like my new car?" or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Of course, cocoa exporters deny all the rumors of trafficking. I Do you think that they are ignorant of this, or are they lying? Are they just keeping their eyes closed? It seems like you gotta know. It's not hidden.
I am 100% that they know it exists now. It's not it's not a hidden information anymore. I have done so many films now, and I can see how it's developed the last 15 years from being something they were like, well, we didn't know there was a problem, to now they are like taking the responsibility for it, or they tend to tell the public that they take this very serious. But when they go to court, because I've been to the court and watching Nestle and Cargill's lawyers arguing in court in the US, saying that, oh, we are just a candy company. We do not know what happens in the plantation. This is not our role. So when they are talking to me as a consumer, they tell me that we are aware, we will do a really good job for you. We will make sure that will end. And when they jump into the courtroom, they are saying, oh, sorry, but this is not our responsibility. So I hope the judges somehow hear what happens in the public.
Yeah, of course. There's tons of footage of 10-year-old kids working on the farms, not going to school. They can't even speak the local language, which means they're not from that country, of course. They're trafficked in. You got people on film quoting prices, saying, How much is a child? €230. It includes delivery.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than that. There's really no speculating when somebody's offering to sell you a kid at a certain price. It means they've done it before and they have the infrastructure to do it. And most children, of course, never get paid. How do we know the kids aren't getting paid?
Because they tell me.
Yeah.
I'm asking the children, how much they get for the work, and they say nothing. They just get food. And
Yeah.
and and
So
and, and, and can you blame the farmer, because he can't afford it? That's the craziness about the system, you know. And that's why I'm saying I'm not trying to protect the farmers, but I do understand the problem from the farmer's point of view. And this is the bigger problem about all this is the system we have in place. It doesn't work. We are we have a system where the one who is hard, the hard working part of it, they get paid nothing, and the other end of the chain, they make a fortune out of it. It doesn't.
yeah,
It
Nestle's
it, it, it
alone is like $100+ billion a year
Yeah, and
company.
the same with Mondelez. It's and Cargill. It's ridiculous.
Did people ever escape?
Yes, they do. I met a few kids in Mali who escaped. The thing is, they when they are like 10, 12, 40, they are, so afraid. The last one I did see, he was so afraid. That was in Ivory Coast. His name was Abu, 14 years old, and he had been in the plantation for 2 years, he told me. And he did, when the camera was not filming him, because we had to, when you are filming in that environment, you need to be quite like cautious, because the farmers, they know that we are doing something which is not good, so we have to be quite like
Discreet?
discreet. Yes, but I asked this guy, 14 years old, and he did like this, and he asked me if I had any money because he was starving.
He signaled
And
to his mouth. For people listening and not watching, he pointed to his mouth like, feed me, basically. I'm
yes,
hungry.
yeah, and
Wow.
I gave him some local banknotes, because it was so, that's again one of the situations where I was like, oh my goodness, we can't leave this boy, because it's the middle of nowhere. Under normal circumstances, you would go to the police and say, hey, there is a crime ongoing, please could you go out there. But first of all, I'm undercover.
Yeah.
I'm illegal in the country. Two, would the local police do anything?
Yeah, they would
And
arrest you
what
and kick your ass, I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
So it's a kind of a
Yeah.
catch-22, but that doesn't really change my mindset on this, because it's so heartbreaking when you see like kids suffering. This is the worst thing for me, seeing kids suffering like that. He was starving, and we're talking about 40 degrees Celsius. That's how hot it is, and they are working like hard working with the machetes in
So it's like
that
100
sun.
degrees outside. Is that what 40 is? I think it's something
Yeah,
like
that's
100
that's
degrees.
around 100, I guess. Yes.
Jeez.
Yeah, and imagine also, I've seen like kids working with the pesticides,
Sure.
and we are talking about poison, and they do not have any like mask or protection. They are just spraying the trees, and they do that at least 4 to 6 times a year. No one knows at the moment what the longer problems would
Yeah,
be
the long-term
by
effects.
effect of using pesticides. I did take a lot of photos of the pesticides just to get an analyze of what it was. And we are talking about serious business. You wouldn't even be able to sell it in Europe, for instance, because that's illegal. And that's what they are spraying the trees with. And they're just spraying without any protection. And how do you think their life would be if they managed to flee from the plantation, which normally would be around when they are like 16, 18, when they get that old that they know, okay, we need to flee from here.
Interpol knows about this and they've rescued children from plantations. Just in case people think like, oh, I don't know, could be another explanation for all this. I mean, there's documented rescues from international organizations, and I know that Nestle and other chocolate companies, they say we don't control the farms, we don't control the labor practices because we don't control the farms. Other industries can and do make an effort to do this. Nestle wouldn't even see your film or meet with you. By the way, I love that you set up a giant screen across from their headquarters and blasted the audio and the video at their headquarters. They must have loved that. That's a bad Monday for Nestle.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that moment. But unfortunately, I was well, I didn't. They took my. The police did a report on me and said that I'm not welcome in Vive, which is the hometown of Nestle's headquarter in Switzerland. So I'm not allowed to go to that canton region in Switzerland. That was what I got told by the police at that at that
Can they do
sequence.
that? They can ban you
Probably
from an
not.
area? No, they
But
can't
but
do
but but
anything.
on the other hand, it's Switzerland.
Yeah.
Honestly, Switzerland is different. It's a kind of its own country in Europe, in the middle
Yeah.
of. This is where you have been hiding gold from the Nazi
Yeah.
times,
Oh, yeah.
in the past, and you have bank secrets and stuff. So I'm not like surprised about the way the Swiss are dealing with a problem from outside. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, it's not. We love to think of Switzerland as the home of chocolate, watches, friendly, whatever people, mixed cultures. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of stolen Nazi gold, money laundering, and serious issues that go with it. And of course, any country like that that has hundreds of billions of dollars flowing through it every single month from companies like Nestle, yeah, they're not necessarily they're not known for putting ethics above money. And I'm saying that as an American, so I realize how hypocritical it probably sounds. But if there's anybody that we can hold hands with in that department, it's Switzerland. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that lots of the chocolate headquarters are in Switzerland because then
Of
they are
course.
not part of the European Union, so they are protected. And none of my films has been shown in Switzerland. Every
Surprise.
time, every time that they get the offer of buying it, they reject it. And the reasons are like, this is not what we are looking for and stuff like that. It's ridiculous in a way. But today with online, it doesn't really matter because if it doesn't go out on a broadcast, it goes online. So they can't
Exactly.
stop the information anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, after your initial expose, chocolate companies, they did start to spend a ton on marketing and whitewashing their reputation, or I should say greenwashing. We've done a show on this, episode 599, on similar things where they sort of label things or say, hey, we're sending the kids to school. Supposedly, we're going to build some local infrastructure. Actually, I was wrong about Nestle's revenue. I think it's 68 billion euros a year, or is it 68 billion euros a year on chocolate alone?
On chocolate.
Oh, okay. So maybe I did have the original figure
Yeah.
correct, but the chocolate figure alone is 68 billion euros. So paying for a living wage or allowing for pesky luxuries like basic human rights for children in their supply chain, it's well within reach if they actually wanted to do it. All right. After your initial expose, you go and investigate their new business practice. Of course, just to see if it's real. But then what? The Ivory Coast wouldn't let you back in, right?
No, so I had to go undercover again, and I couldn't get. I asked for 2 years. I asked all the companies for the list of the schools they're claiming to build, and all the projects because I was actually open to see because they claim that we are doing a lot for fighting against child labor. We are building schools and stuff like that. And I was just saying, hey, please, I would love to go. Could you just send me the list of the schools? And they rejected that. And then we decided to say, hey, let's just go undercover again and see, and just digging around with my local fixer and see what we can find. And then we did find schools which was like not even half done. And the guy who was running the school, he said, well, yeah, they came and we were doing the plans and they did the first foundation of the school and then they disappeared and never came back. So it was just the schools we went to. It was, again, just greenwashing. And
Yeah.
again, I do not understand why is it that people want to lie about it? Why not like
It's
be
cheaper, right?
well?
It's cheaper.
Yeah, but a bit of how can you lie to the consumers? Maybe it's because the consumers really don't care. I don't know. I don't understand because they at that time they knew about me. They knew what I was capable to do. So not giving me the list of the projects they claimed they did was one thing I didn't understand. And then afterward, they said, "Oh yeah, by the way, there were it was in between two elections, and there were a civil war in Ivory Coast at that time. That was the reason why we had to pull out." The thing is, they were right. It was in the middle of two presidents that were there was a civil war. But we were talking about, when I saw the school, that was like, I think 14 months later. They had all the time to get back to make what they promised, but they didn't.
Well, they had a built-in excuse, right? They can say, "Well, there was a war," and they're not wrong about that. But it's like, well, should we restart this project? Nah, we already got the photos. We already printed out the brochures. If that Mickey guy goes back, we'll just say there was a war, right? I mean, it's really. How did you get back into the country? Did you have them traffic you into the country via the back roads and things like that? I mean, you already know how to get in illegally because you saw them do it with
No,
the
the,
kids.
the the thing is, I was banned by the former president, and now a new president was in office. So and my local fixer, he told me, no one knows. It's all right. Let's just take the chance, and then we did
Oh
that.
wow.
Yeah,
That's a quite a gamble. Um,
yeah.
you found many of the schools are just concrete shells. I saw the video on that, and I thought, oh man, it doesn't have a roof. There's no floor. There's nothing here. I mean, it's a couple of walls with holes in them. I mean, that was really it. Uh,
And remember, when the companies are talking about
mhm.
this in Brazil, in like glossy marketing papers, they never tell this. They just take some nice photos and claiming, this is what we do. And it is difficult to be a consumer then, to really see if they are lying or not, because they have the pictures from maybe another school or whatever. I don't know. But the five places out of a list turned out to be 31. The five schools were all lacking construction when we were there.
Some companies had popped up to try and audit the cocoa supply chain. For example, Source Trust claims to be able to trace fair trade cocoa back to the farm using these code numbers. But then you visited one of their offices, they picked a sack and showed you how it's traced. Then you're like, well, I'll just pick a random one and you trace it. And then they couldn't do it. And then you picked another one and they couldn't do it. What did you make of that at that point? Because it was pretty
Ah,
obvious they were just like picking the one where the system worked and the rest of them are just the
do
whole
you know
thing
what? Do
looks
you
like
know what?
bullshit.
The thing is, I remember this so clear because I my intention was good. I was really looking for the good example of how you could do this. And I gave them so many chances. And you know what? At the end, and I can reveal this now today, the sack they at the end of the clip did find to match the code I was asking for was
Okay.
not the one.
Oh, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
So
I was just like, this was my, at that time, that was in 2012. I was just so like, it was a kind of a hope inside me,
yeah,
because
sure.
this was the good example, but it was not the right one. But I just gave them the credit, which was a mistake at that time. But now I can say it because I've just seen that even the so-called sustainable sourced cocoa is the same kind of shit, to be honest.
So is Source Trust a front to keep up appearances, or was it just garden variety incompetence that their system didn't work? Or you think it's just it doesn't work at all and it's just a bunch of nonsense for PR?
It's a bunch of nonsense. The problem is, because I saw that in Ivory Coast less than 2 years ago, we went to fair trade places, and it is in my newest film. We went to this place where they are covering 1,000 plantations, and fair trade comes like once once in 3 years to to check, and they don't know where the cocoa bean comes from. It will be mixed up with conventional production. No one really knows. They know the farmers, but they don't know where the beans are from, because
Right.
it's just mixed up. It's a kind of, you pay a premium, but for what?
Right.
It it
Yeah.
it it it, it doesn't, and that's where my, let's say, my hope did break, because I thought this was the right way to do it, but as it is right now, it does not work.
So what about the fair trade seals on like the things on chocolate, those labels? Are they valid at all, or is it just like, hey, we tried to audit this, but it's bullshit? Ah, well, they paid, so put the frog on it.
Yeah,
That's it, huh?
exactly. And I said in Ghana this year, we were checking Mondelez Cocoa Life. It's a green stamp on every. If you go to your local supermarket and find a, Mondelez chocolate, there's lots of that in US. Um, I went to a specific plantation which was certified by Cocoa Life, and that Cocoa Life is Mondelez's own brand. It was full of children, and that was so-called 100% sustainable sourced cocoa.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
I know it's ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
and remember, for me, it's even worse because I want to find the hope in it. But unfortunately, the system does not work as it stands. Um, so even the sustainable cocoa is not great, but there are like ways to get around it. But I would never go for any chocolate where it doesn't tell me on the chocolate bar where the origin of the bean comes from. Because I, for instance, what I do, I buy chocolate from Ecuador or from Peru or South America, because cocoa plantations or cocoa production in South America is quite like, it's part of the history of South America. It's something you have been using in the food of South American food. The Aztecs, the Maya has been doing that for centuries. Well, for three, 4,000 years. So it's a kind of the culture. Beware that the cocoa beans came to Africa in the mid 1800th century.
Ah, I didn't know that.
No, but that's the thing. No one in Africa cares about cocoa. It's trees which came from South America with the slave trades and stuff. So and suddenly in 1860s, white people came and say, "Hey, those cocoa beans, we like to buy them," and they were just saying, literally saying, "Yeah, if you like, okay, buy it," because it's not, cocoa beans is not something you use in Africa. It's just a commodity. It's just something someone wants to buy. In South America, if you go to Mexico, cocoa beans is part of chili con carne, or it's part of the food tradition. So there
Right.
is a difference between the two places, and child labor in the cocoa in cocoa industry in South America is, I can't guarantee that there is absolutely no children, but it's
Sure.
not something we have been hearing about. It's not a problem. So I always go for the cocoa, which is the chocolate bar, which is from South America, and that's easy to find.
Interesting.
And the funny thing is, if it doesn't say anything, it's from Ivory Coast. No one,
Really?
no one is
Well, that makes sense.
actually marketing it as this is from Ivory Coast.
Right.
No one. So
Yeah, it's
that's the way
almost
to come around it.
that's interesting. That makes sense. So if you're a consumer and you love chocolate, get South American chocolate because chances are it doesn't have the same types of problems. And I know people are probably a little confused here. There are auditors who certify the plantations. The problem is it sounds like this happens one time every 3 years or so. So you just how the heck are you going to enforce child labor laws at that scale and that frequency? It just doesn't make any sense. The farm inspections are so sporadic that that means they're going to be easily evaded, and it just it 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 would be very impossible for these inspectors to come and audit because there are thousands and thousands of these very small farms and plantations. So essentially, when the certification auditors come, the children get ushered from the fields somewhere else, and the farmers say, "There's no kids here." And this is from a Nestle report. This is from a 2017 report from Nestle saying we can't audit all these, and they're easily evaded, and the farmers deny it happening, even though we know it's happening. So it's not even the company saying, "Hey, none of this is happening." They know that it's happening, and they just say we can't do anything about it, which is somehow worse because that's BS.
Yeah. No, it's and as I said, the cooperative I visited latest, they have like 1,000 farms, and how can you check 1,000 farms?
You don't. You
It
check
would,
100 and you say whatever, it's fine, right?
yeah.
You check 10% or less than that, and you say it's probably fine. These are
And
fine.
one a news I got was that a lot of farmers now are removing from fair trade production. It's a premium one. They get a little bit more paid for the cocoa beans, but the problem is the admin work they need to do is enormous. So they can't afford staff to work in the plantation, but now they have to do a lot of admin work, do documents and stuff like that. And the price they get more for the premium beans is not enough. So they go back to conventional production again, because the problem is the price difference between a conventional production and a premium one is too small. Fair trade doesn't pay enough for it. So that's quite a new problem.
There's a lawsuit, or there was a lawsuit going in. It made it all the way up to the Supreme Court with some essentially escaped slave children who worked in these plantations, and these huge companies, the chocolate companies, Cargill, Nestle, they hired some of the biggest law firms in the United States. And this one dude who's got a two-person firm, essentially, Terry Cosgrove is his name. They're taking him on. And I used to be in the legal space. I used to be an attorney myself. So these firms, for other lawyers out there listening, talking about Gibson Dunn, 1,200 lawyers there, Mayer Brown, 1,600 plus lawyers there, just to give people an idea of how the resources that these companies are mustering. Obviously, these attorneys are not all working on the chocolate case, but that just gives you an idea of what these chocolate companies are throwing at the fight against two guys who are working pro bono for free on these cases. These are $1,000 an hour lawyers billing, so they would love for this to go on for a decade and a half and bill the entire time, because the cases are worth billions of dollars to the chocolate companies. They're just trying to win the case with money. And it's just very, very clear that there's so much money involved that they can afford to delay this. But it's like, at what cost? The ethical cost is extremely high. Um, I know, and I've read in my research, Mickey, that Cargill has some training against child labor, which is technically illegal on the ground. But it sounds like the training is, hey, make sure you don't have any illegal kids working on your farm. It's just the fox guarding the chicken coop, as we say over here in the United States. I mean, this is the honor system. It makes absolutely no sense.
No, not at all. And I think if this need to be solved, they need to put much more money into it, because of course there are like programs. Good Weave, for instance, in India, is a good example of how they got rid of children working in the carpet industry. But they need to have a system where they're monitoring this quite with independent people. You can't have like the company just paying out a third party. It needs to be a system where you do it because you want to get rid of children. And at the end of the day, children should not work. They should go to school. If you want to end any poverty, I guess it's quite simple. It starts with school. If you don't have basic school, you don't get out of poverty ever. And that's the first step to take. It's not telling Cargill, telling you are not allowed to use a machete. The funny thing is, I've heard people, even in the industry, saying, "Yeah, but it's not like that difficult. You know, they can help the parents a few hours. But tell me one thing they can do in a cocoa field which fits to a child.
Hmm.
Working with a machete? Well,
No.
no. Working with pesticides? No. What is it they want the kids carrying heavy loads? No.
Mm.
So please just tell me, what is it that you think children should do in the fields with the parent, the so-called parents? It's just like it's I think we see a lot of explanations instead of solutions. They try to explain every time they get caught by people like me. They try to explain, well, it's not that bad. We're doing this, this, and this. But at the end of the day, they don't really do anything to solve the problem. Um, Unfortunately, I think what I thought in the beginning that journalism could change the whole thing, but I realized it probably can't. Also thought that what's it called, law or what is that?
Legislation?
Yeah, legislation.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's a
a
tough
bit.
one.
I thought that maybe if we had the right laws, that we would be able to change it, but we can't because we have the laws at the moment. In the US, you actually also have a law against production produced by forced labor. That's actually a law from 1930s in the US. So but the law enforcement, the custom and border department doesn't really do anything about it. There are like a few cases I have knowledge of, but the problem is it comes down to, you know, the politics you have in your country, and are you protecting corporate America, or are you protecting basic human rights? In my opinion, and that's a big question.
It is a big question, and unfortunately, especially recently, our courts, especially our higher courts, it's sort of the standard operating procedure to protect corporate interests. Whether or not people would agree with that there's a debate there, I suppose. But at the end of the day, they're going to usually find a reason to side with a corporate interest versus something that is external to the United States, especially some kind of competing interest. So that's obviously a huge problem. We see that all the time. Let's end on a little bit of a hopeful note here. The EU has recently banned products using forced labor. What does that mean? I assume that's partly because of cotton from Xinjiang, China, but tell me what it means for chocolate.
The thing is, they want to force all the 27 countries in the EU to to get rid of any projects they try to sell in the EU market can't be produced by forced labor. That means that for child labor in the cocoa industry, they are going to show a supply chain before they can sell anything in the EU, and that's really a big step. I think it's really like the most positive thing I have been hearing for the past 15 years. Now, we don't know how they're gonna secure this, because that's law enforcement in each country. They need to make sure that any companies who want to sell anything in the EU, that the supply chain is not contain any production in with forced labor. So I don't know how that's gonna work, but
Yeah.
I think it's the right step, and I'm really satisfied about this. So there are like a few things ongoing, and I know that there is a couple of lawyers in the US who are still filing new cases against the big corporations. And I guess that, of course, they have loads of money to protect themselves, but I don't think that the time right now is for more bad publicity. And I think with the climate changes and the lack of human rights, and the war in Russia and everything in one big dish, I think we are facing new way of thinking. If we have to survive a couple of generations anyway, we need to make changes with the climate. That climate changes is the big threat at the moment. And if we don't do anything, if we don't rethink the way we live, we won't be here. Well, at least your grandchildren won't be here. That's not something I make up. This is, I think, quite common knowledge set by science at the moment. And they were talking about 25 years to 30 years. And so I think there is a kind of an understanding that we need to change. And I think this new EU law is in the right direction of what I've just said, that changes is a need now. And I have to believe that we will do that all together. We need to do something all together. Otherwise, we will burn up in maybe not hell, but somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere right here on Earth. And by the way, I said let's end on a hopeful note. Come on, Mickey. That's not what I meant. You got to learn to follow instructions. No, thank you so much for your time. Really enlightening and just an amazing expose of an industry that a lot of people say, I mean, I'm feeding this stuff to my kids, you know, it's happy. It's those eggs that you open up from Cadbury that have the gross liquid center. I mean,
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
on Christmas and here it is made by some kid who doesn't get to have any time off and works in a field
But the
12 hours a
good,
day. I mean, it's just
but the
horrible,
good news
horrifying.
is, but just as a last note, the good news is we can change this. Why
Mhm.
not doing it? Let's just do it together. Of course we can.
Miki Mistrati, thank you so much. We're going to link to your films and things like that that we can find for public consumption there in the show notes, as well as some resources on how to get slave-free chocolate. And I really appreciate your time and your work in this area. It's really, really enlightening.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe. All right, hopefully that worked.